What I want to talk about today is the process of writing a book. To put it simply, or to get straight to the point, I've dedicated the past maybe year and a half to writing a novel, and I finally finished the first draft, and I've been reading through it, editing it. I printed it out. Actually, one second. And I've printed out a copy in which I'm sort of, reading page by page and making notes and saying things that I should completely change or things that I find really interesting or whatever, making edits, obviously, as one does when fixing a book. And if I'm honest, it's not good. It is not a good book. Frankly, it is not a good book. And that isn't to say that there's no emotion behind it, that I didn't put a year of effort into it, that it's not based off of ideas that mean a lot to me. But every day, probably, as I've written this and as I continue to work on it, I think, I think this is the biggest piece of shit ever, and I should just give up, if I'm completely honest. I have that thought every day, basically after every paragraph that I read, and I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm not. Maybe I'm making this video in some ways to comfort myself and say that, self-doubt or just thinking that your work is no good is a normal part of the process. But there'll just be paragraphs that I read and I'm just like, I just delete, I cut everything out of it. This is horrible. Times where I'm being too dramatic, where I'm repeating the same thoughts over and over again. And it's like, where is this going? You're just repeating, yeah, Albert, you're sad. Okay, cool. Like, we get it. And so I have people that, friends that I've told about, my ambitions, and they ask me to send them a copy of it, and I do, and it's like, yeah, okay, you can read this, whatever, but also it's going to be completely different once I'm done, before I think it's any good. But the flip side of that is there are times where I really see and believe in what I'm saying. There will be times where I literally will just put a check mark after a paragraph where I'm like, wow, that is really good. That captures perfectly a feeling that I have, that I want to capture, and there's not a single thing that I would change about it. So that dichotomy, I think, is really, I believe it's a normal part of the process. I guess to boil it down, there's just some days where you think that you are a piece of shit and you have nothing worth saying, and then there are some days where it's like, wow, like, you actually have written something here, Albert. And that dichotomy happens every day. There's a video I saw the other day that tells me that I'm not alone in this thought pattern. It was, I think it might have been Penguin, the Instagram account. Not 100% sure, but basically a bunch of successful writers, best-selling authors were being interviewed, and they were being asked, have you ever thought about quitting? And every single writer, without fail, says, yes, I think about quitting every single day. And wow, there's a lot of bugs here. Hopefully it's not too... I think about quitting every single day. And that, gives me a lot of reassurance. But, it's reassuring because they're successful. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's reassuring because they're successful, but then also when you really think about it, and I think about the fact that I'm not successful yet, hopefully, it's like, yeah, this person, they might have thought they were terrible, but they are actually like, this person probably went to Harvard and got a PhD in history or whatever it might be. Or this person actually writes about meaningful stuff and does a lot of research behind their novels and things like that. I mean, there was this novelist, I think this 20-year-old kid from Europe who wrote like a multi-generational war novel. And it's like, that kid's like 3 years younger than me. And he's written something that takes years, takes a lifetime of nuanced understanding of the depths of what Eastern European life has been like and how it's been impacted by war. That is something that I will never be able to understand, despite how much I would love to try. And it's like, how am I ever supposed to replicate or do something that comes even as close to something like that? But then again, that's not, comparison's the thief of joy. And if I'm always chasing someone else, if I'm always I'm not trying to write because I'm trying to be seen as some genius. I write because it's something that I enjoy. And I believe that what I have to say is meaningful to me. But then sometimes I doubt that. So I hope I'm capturing this dynamic. I guess a useful thing for me to do might be to tell you all what my novel's about, what the idea is, and maybe that sounds interesting to you. And hopefully, if and when it's out for publishing, you end up buying it, but obviously no obligation to do that. I'm sure I'd probably rather buy 2 cups of coffee than buy a book sometimes, so I don't blame you. But yeah, the book is called As the Dust Settled. And the whole genesis for that idea was when maybe a year or so ago, a couple years ago, I had the thought of, I was 21 or whatever, and I was thinking about sort of my future self, and I was thinking, wow, I just wish I could snap my fingers and be 30 years old, because by then I'd be married, I'd be happy in my life, I'd be fulfilled, I'd be doing something that I loved, and I'd have everything figured out. All the problems that 20-year-old Albert faces would no longer exist because I'm 30. But then, as I talked to more people about this idea, the more I realized how foolish of a thought pattern that was. This whole idea that if you just wait for time to pass, that somehow all of the internal struggles that you have, all the problems about yourself that you haven't confronted yet, that somehow those will be magically solved simply because time passed. I think that idea, as I've learned and as I've written about in the novel, is completely ridiculous, is unfounded, and the gears began to turn in my head. I was like, well, what if I wrote a book about that? What if I wrote a character who was very loosely, or in a lot of ways is based off of me, and I had him have this dialogue, have this relationship with the version of himself that was 10 years older. So that's the idea of the book. What would happen if I met the version of myself who was 10 years older? What kind of illusions about love and life and, the monotony of everydayness would I continue to have as a 30-year-old, and what lessons would I have learned from, what mistakes would I have made that I could potentially impart on my younger self? All these sort of questions that, as a friend told me, all these questions that make a book are the questions that I'm trying to tackle in this novel of mine. Whether or not I've done a good job, obviously, that's not for me to decide. Obviously, I have my own kind of thoughts on it. I think I do a great job of being vulnerable, of being willing to share things about myself that I think a lot of people wouldn't want to share and put it on paper. A lot of, difficult issues I've had, maybe with relationships with people, anxieties that I've had, a lot of my own faults as a person. But I also think sometimes the biggest doubt I have about my novel is that sometimes I think it peters too far towards just being a melodramatic, journal, essentially, of me complaining about things that bothered me. And my worry is that it's just 200 or 300 pages, just me doing the same thing over and over again. But, the reality is that it's probably somewhere in between, and that's where I hope to get the guidance of, publishers and representation, if that's something that ever becomes possible for me, and, get to learn and work on my craft and get better. That's obviously the whole point. I mean, running has taught me that, and as I try to embark on this literary journey, I'm sure those same lessons will apply there too. All there is for me to do now is finish editing, to put myself out there and learn something, really. That is the only thing that I'm trying to accomplish with this novel. Whether I make a single cent from this means very little to me. Obviously, it would be great. Who wouldn't love if, my first try at writing something won the Pulitzer? But to me, something just as valuable would be if I could send it to 100 people and only one of them responded with, Albert, you've got something here. Here's what you can learn from this experience. And I can leave with a piece of constructive feedback that informs the way that I go about writing my next book, goes about the way that I, craft my next novel. Then that one piece of feedback will be incredibly useful, and I'll be incredibly grateful to receive it. So, we'll see what happens. The only thing for me to do now is to keep going. So, that's it. I'll see you soon.